doctor. This is one of the things I do on this stream, the Rhetoric Prof stream. It's the second time doing it. The idea of this format is you bring your argument, bring an argument, and we will make it stronger, fitter, better, faster, whatever you want. And we can do this in a couple of ways. One is that you can give the argument and I'll argue against it. Give you some practice, like going to the dojo, getting some work on the punching bag. I'll do my best to be as good an opponent as I can be, help you sharpen up your skills on the argument, or we can just talk about it. Talk about where does this argument come up in your life? How do you want to make it better? What are the problems that you faced in trying to make this argument before, or where does this come up? Whatever you want to talk about. But this is also a back to school edition because I am going back to school. I'm often in school in a literal way, but also in a metaphorical way. I'm always going back to school because I'm forever a student, and I really like that. But also, the semester is starting at the university that I teach at, and so especially interested in any arguments that you might have if you are in school that might come up during your time at school. But welcome, whoever is here or not here yet. Maybe you're watching this on the VOD, the VOD, or maybe you're not watching this at all. But either way, welcome. I just watched a great movie, The Crucible, and if you might have read this play before by Arthur Miller. It's a famous play. I just watched the Daniel Day-Lewis movie of it because I was thinking about going to Salem tomorrow, and my girlfriend and I watched this movie as a way of reminding ourselves, and it looks like we're not going to Salem tomorrow on the basis of what this film shows about Salem, and it's not so pretty as all that. Of course, it's not exactly accurate in all of the facts, but sometimes in order to get to the meaning or the truth of a thing, you actually have to communicate it without just using facts. You have to use other things. Sometimes you have to use art, and Arthur Miller does a great job of communicating that in this particular play, I think. I think it's a really powerful one. If you haven't seen it, I really recommend it. It's one of those great exemplars of what happens when we live with suspicion and accusation, how accusation creates all sorts of moral hazards and incentives, and very interesting in that way. It reminds me a little bit of a work of art, which is the Star Trek episode The Drumhead from the Star Trek Next Generation, which is a similar kind of plot, done in like 45 minutes, though, not 2 hours like the movie. So if you need a short version of this theme and you're not ready for the 17th century New England accents, maybe check out The Drumhead, which you can find on Netflix if you are in the United States. Probably, I think, in a lot of places. Star Trek Next Generation, the episode is The Drumhead. Pretty good one. But yeah, headed back to school. If you have an argument, bring it forward and we'll talk about it. Really, this stream is just an excuse to stream again. I haven't done it in a while. I was thinking about trying to do it every week. And I think I will try to do that, but it's been a little difficult to do that recently. It's never going to be not difficult. I just have to do it. But I also enjoy doing it. So hopefully we'll have some people come in. I don't usually stream this late, but this is a new, let's try it late. Let's do a late night show. So welcome to the stream if you're coming for the first time. My name's Tim. This is the Rhetoric Prof channel. I teach rhetoric, whatever that is. We can talk about it if you're interested. Public speaking, argument, debate, those kinds of things. And this is an argument doctor stream in this format. You bring your arguments to me, and we will make them better together. And we can do that in a number of ways, really depend on what you want. But I can argue against you and try to give you some practice, arguing against a worthy opponent, or we can be more collaborative and just kind of think about it. And what are you trying to do when this argument comes up, and how do you feel about it, and what's going on in your life and in the context that you're in, which might be the better way to do it, but depends on what you want to do. I'm also just here to chat. Off-topic question. There's no off-topic questions because there's not really much of a topic. Have you ever stepped on a bug on purpose before? Would you ever do it again? That's a great question. It's a great question. Funny enough, sometimes when I would get bored in the summer, my mother would send me on the back deck with a fly swatter out in the little yard. She's just like, go kill flies. So I can't say I never killed a fly. I did it as entertainment, but in a weird way of just kind of being like, yeah, I felt I was doing like a job or a task. But yeah, I don't have a lot of, it's not that I don't think, actually, I think quite a lot about bugs. I've been thinking about bees a lot recently. It's not that I don't think that bugs don't have a worthy life, but I also don't feel too bad killing a bug. So why is that? I don't know. Maybe I'm just justifying it to myself, and maybe we have to all be careful for those things. There are spiritualities and religions where even the killing of that kind of a life, I think I mostly associate a kind of very ascetic Jainism with this view. Jainism is not a very popular world religion, but it's one that there's a principle called Ahimsa, and Jainism is mostly found in the Indian subcontinent. I can't say that I know a whole lot about it, to be honest with you, so this is stuff I'm remembering from way back. But in the Ahimsa principle is like a radical principle of nonviolence, so that only very few people do this, not most Jains do this, but very ascetic religious practitioners at the end of their life will not open their mouths because if a bug flies in, you might accidentally kill it. And through this, there have been instances in which people have died of starvation through this kind of final act of nonviolence. Very unusual. So that I find to be quite extreme. I think it's an interesting religious practice and one that I'm sure has a lot of value for someone who lives in that tradition and for whom it orients your life. That is not my tradition. I don't believe in radical nonviolence, I have to admit. I think violence is probably a little bit inevitable. So, hey, good evening. What's up, Garrison? Talking about killing bugs. So I guess my argument for why I would kill a bug, I have a few. One comes from Douglas Hofstadter's very strange book called I Am a Strange Loop. You might, if you know Douglas Hofstadter, either you're really involved in some very old computer science and a theory of machine learning that is not available to people anymore if you're doing research that's actually getting funding. But interesting guy in that respect. But he also wrote a bunch of books. The most famous was called Gödel, Escher, Bach, which was a book about like logical, philosophical paradoxes. And I thought this was a really cool book. I read his other one called I Am a Strange Loop. And in this book, he makes an argument kind of for why it's okay to eat meat or to feel differently about animals than humans. One of the arguments is that souls, what he calls souls, have different sizes. And he's like, even with animals, the size of a dog's soul is bigger than the soul of a rat. It doesn't exactly follow a body. He has some weird arguments about what a soul is, and he thinks about it in terms of kind of like philosophical computer science. It's a very unusual book, but I think the idea of having hierarchies of value can be quite dangerous when people get attached to a hierarchy of value as an idea of truth. But I think it's also pretty fair to say, if you just look at how humans live in the world, it's very difficult to describe what they do in a meaningful way without thinking about how you might describe that in terms of the hierarchy of values that they show. So while I don't think that there's an absolute hierarchy of values that you have to ascribe to be a good person, I also think that pretty much no matter what you do, your behavior can be described by another person as following or showing a hierarchy of value. And so because of that, I think that the principle of all life being equal isn't one that can really be followed. So can it be a good principle if it's not really followed? I doubt that. I don't want to get into all of the pedantic arguments about it, because there's really great arguments against this as well, I would say. And I can point you to a number of those if you're interested. But one of the arguments that I think is really powerful in this way does think about microbial life, and if it's simply life, that's all we're thinking about, and we just accept a scientific definition of life as what we value about life. If science says it's a living being, well, therefore we have to respect its life. We would never take antibiotics because that would be mass killing. But of course, we don't actually feel that way about antibiotics. We feel that way about, we feel that they're helpful most of the time. There are some problems with antibiotics. In fact, I had a summer job campaigning against the use of antibiotics at factory farms. That's another story. But I have to admit to you, though that argument is one that I find pretty convincing, not the one that really does it for me. But I had another experience which is very much not like that, not very philosophical, at least in the beginning, which was I was watching a movie with friends. The movie was called Planète Fantastique. It's a French-Czech. It was the language was French. It's not too much speaking in the movie anyway, so don't be scared off by that if you're not a big fan of foreign films. It's a cartoon. It's an animated film. It's not a cartoon, but it's an animated film. And in the film, it's like science fiction. There's a large race. I forget the names of the race. Large alien race and a very tiny one, the tiny one is like human beings. They look humanoid. And one of the animation's not spectacular. And so even some of the things that they could have maybe made more interesting in this respect, it doesn't quite do that. But nevertheless, while I was watching it for the first time, I had an insight or kind of horrible realization, which is that these giant beings, based on the fact that they couldn't see much of the human life, it was just very small, literally small, how could they really respect it? And so there's also just a problem of scale in terms of our values and our ethics. Our ethics are necessarily quite limited by the limitations that we have in other respects, by our physicality, by the duration of our life, by our understanding. And so it's not something to celebrate necessarily. You can celebrate it if you want. But the fact that we are limited in our ethical life by our own limitations, by our mortality, by our humanity, to only be able to have feeling for those things that are on a human scale, is an important thing to keep in mind. And some of the illustrations of that are quite cynical. There's that old quote often attributed to Stalin that if one person dies, it's a tragedy. If a million die, it's a statistic. I prefer Mel Brooks's line, which is, if I cut my finger, that's a tragedy. If I fall into a sewer grate, that's comedy. I think that the Mel Brooks line, I gel a little bit more closely with that than the Stalin quote. I don't think it's really from Stalin anyway. But so, welcome to the stream. Obviously, I don't have any problem talking, but bring me an argument or an idea, and we can talk about it to make it a better argument for you. Or, as you can see with Carious questions. Carious questions? That's an interesting name. Just give me a question, and I'll do my best to answer it. I can go on for like 20 minutes about a very stupid question, so that's not hard to do. So if you want to do that, that's great. Yeah, I haven't thought about Planète Fantastique in a long time, though, so thanks for bringing that up, because that got me to that weird memory of that movie. Should probably go watch that one, too. I wonder if I should work on the... I wanted to play music, but I'm a little worried about copyright. I'm not quite sure how that works. I have to look into whether you get a DMCA strike for playing music in the background. But just imagine there's music. Play your own music. That way everyone gets to listen to the music they want to. Perfect. Problem solved. My girlfriend just sent me some music, but I can't listen to it right now for the reasons I just described. So I'll listen to that later. Yeah. So yeah, back to school. I'm sure some of you are probably also going back to school. It's a strange time for that. For lots of reasons. I think a lot of people feel that, especially those of you who are in school, feel that their lives were interrupted, and there's, in some sense, a pressure for things to be normal again, to go back to normal, and then also, I think also a lot of very reasonable resistance to that, of being like, wait a minute, things are still not quite normal, and maybe even worse than they were when we were feeling like it was really bad. We're just tricking ourselves. So there's uncertainty about how to read the very broad situation that we're in. not the situation that arises from being with a certain number of friends. Yeah, I hope this year is better too, Garrison. Yeah, I hope this year is better too. I mean, I hope for you it can be. I know for some people it won't, but I hope for you that it can be. I think but that's one of the weird things about this year is like we're looking at it, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. I'm excited to be back in the classroom and to see people, to be around students and to talk closely. I'm also unsure of what it's going to look like because we'll be masked, and some people will still be remote, but you're not supposed to be remote unless you really need to be remote. How's this going to end up? Is this going to return to what it was like last semester where most people were not in the classroom and they were just online? What is it going to look like? Not sure about that. But being okay with that too is also what I feel. Being kind of ready to accept a lot of uncertainty. Have to accept it anyway, but being ready to accept it because I've had almost too much certainty of what life was going to feel like for a while. Just like it's going to be right here, right in this room. So uncertainty doesn't have to be a bad thing. And that's one of the things that I try to encourage in myself as well as bring into my teaching of thinking about uncertain situations, being uncertain about your own beliefs and your affiliations and how nevertheless to act in the world. You can't wait for certainty because it probably will never arrive on almost any issue. You probably will never feel totally certain. And that doesn't mean that you have to be kind of reckless or thoughtless, but it also doesn't mean that you have to be cynical and assume that you are certain when you're not. You don't have to be certain in order to be a serious, committed person in life and to do lots of things. In fact, I think that people are really only serious if they recognize that their commitments are partially based on things they don't know, and that's okay. They kind of accept that as part of life. That makes you a more generous and open person as well, I think, generally speaking. But anyway, I also hope that this year is better and will bring people a sense of belonging and closeness that they seem to want a lot. And I think I also often want a sense of being with other people in a real way. One of the things about the movie The Crucible, which I just watched, I was mentioning that at the beginning of the stream, is there's a kind of dark side of togetherness where envy and bitterness can rise up in a community, and given an opportunity to express itself, as it does in the movie through accusations of witchcraft, it consumes the whole community. The community kind of, the worst side of the community, it's like worst motivations and superstitions show themselves and control events. And that's one of the dangers of living in community, is that, of course, we all live with around and among other people who, like ourselves, have a full range of humanity, which includes a lot of dark impulses. But I think one of the beautiful things about being with other people is that we feel it if we are in tune with those other impulses. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about those and their impulses, because I've been thinking about them a lot. In addition to being with those dark impulses, we are with people who are choosing not to indulge, at least in the full unsublimated version, those impulses. And that's a beautiful thing, because it doesn't ever have to be that. I think sometimes our political imaginations or our desires to be with other people can be kind of fooled into the idea that we could have that by rule, by mandate. We could impose that in the world, make people be the best part of themselves. But one thing is that I feel pretty confident about, I won't say that I'm certain about, but I feel pretty confident about, is that it will always be possible for people to turn to those dark impulses. And so it's always an achievement when we don't. That might seem like a quite pessimistic kind of optimism, and I think that's exactly what I would call it too. But whenever we have an opportunity not to do that, we can take it. And when others take it and they join us in that, I think that's a small achievement of human culture. We just don't always have to indulge the dark side. But yeah, However, there is quite a bit of that going around, and people hurting themselves. There's maybe I think, a false idea of evil or dark impulses, which is that they're always self-serving, or that they are, that there's a very simple way in which they're self-serving, is that they seek advantage. People are seeking what's good for them. And I don't know about you, but the way I feel is I'm not sure what's good for me. And I think people do quite a bit of damage to themselves in pursuing with certainty that is not genuine or authentic what they think is good for themselves at any moment. And they're very committed to an idea so much that they'll continue to injure themselves, hurt themselves, put themselves in harm's way to appear to themselves in a certain light and appear to others, of course, as well. So even narcissism has a kind of other-centeredness to it, doesn't it? You want to appear a certain way. You do care about what people think. Narcissists tend to really care about what other people think. These terms, I don't love the terms all the time, but there is something about narcissists because, as I was talking with my friend the other day, it's good to remember the myth that comes from. And there's more than two, but there are two important variations on the myth. So if you remember the myth, narcissist, there's echo there too. We won't go into the whole thing because it goes on for a long time. You could read Ovid if you're interested in it. But obviously narcissist falls in love with his own image. And in the myth, he's looking into a lake. And in one version of this, he dies in two different ways. In one version, he so falls in love with his own image that he tries to kiss the other, but in doing so, falls into the lake and drowns. That's one version. The other one, he's so captivated, you might say, fascinated by his own image, that he cannot move. And in a weird kind of mythical transformation becomes a flower, which still bears the name, I think, today, Narcissus. I think it's kind of like a white lily-looking flower. I don't know my flowers that well. My botany's a little rusty. But these two moments, they might give us kind of two images of what it might be like to have this problem. Maybe it's a problem we all have in some ways. But in both of these cases, Narcissus doesn't fall in love with his own image as with the knowledge that it's his image. He falls in love with the image with a mistaken impression that it's somebody else, that it's another person. So even at that most kind of apparently selfish, disgustingly self-centered impulse, there's an image of the other. It's a mistaken image. And I think that that's, in a weird way, hopeful to me. It's kind of a hopeful element of the myth, which is that if the narcissist, the person there, not to correct their misapprehension, but to get them to see themselves in more parts of the world, wouldn't that look just kind of like compassion? Does it matter whether you begin with an image of the self that you identify with others, or if an image of the others that you identify with yourself? Once you equate them, isn't it kind of the same thing? So isn't it then possible, maybe, that the narcissist could, if given a sufficient breadth to their image of themselves, look like a bodhisattva, look like a saint? I find that to be quite hopeful. But I do feel like right now there's more people adopting the falling into the lake version than the I'm just going to sit here until the person approaches me and turn into a flower. And so in the falling into a lake situation that we're in now, with people not protecting themselves from COVID and doing all sorts of other things, as people always do, that one's kind of forefront in my mind, as it probably is in many of yours. People choosing not to pursue a vaccination, or who deny the reality of the disease, which becomes increasingly grotesque as a gesture to make, to deny the reality of other people's death, a mass event, to say that all of this is just a show, is to limit your world, to make it quite small, to make your source of reality not much larger than the walls of your abode. If you are lucky to have one. So, yeah, that's a very sad and dark version of that. But I do still, even in those cases, have hope that if we could come to a more compassionate understanding of why people might be motivated in that way, to see what it is that they desire to preserve, we might be able to not necessarily help everybody, but to have a more likely situation, more likely discourse in which people wouldn't plunge into the lake. They would hold on a little bit and see if what they have fallen in love with will approach them. And if not, maybe they need to change course. A lot of people think about, one of the reasons why I think this idea of like self-serving, again, this is an argument doctor stream, so if you have an argument, bring it. I'm just going to keep talking until somebody has an argument, because I don't have anything else to show. There's no music. I'm not a pretty person, so I just got to talk. One of the, what was I going to say? Oh, I just forgot. Yeah, when we have this simple model of people pursuing their advantage, this is what makes people someone greedy or selfish, is they're pursuing their own advantage. Like, it's very simple to know what would be better for you. Now, we can create situations in which it's obviously, do you want $20 or $100? Oh yeah, sure, $100. These like thought experiments that you might encounter in Economics 101 or something like that make it seem like, oh yeah, sure, it's very obvious what your advantage is. It's really not. There's lots of ways to realize that, I think. I think it seems to me pretty obvious, just looking around at people that you know. Except that these people always get dismissed as irrational. Oh, they're just irrational people. If you were rational enough, it would be clear what your advantage is. I really don't believe that. And I don't believe that for lots of reasons. But one of them, the most rational reason I don't believe that, is because I play a lot of chess. And I don't claim to be particularly good, but I play enough of it that I know there are different levels of chess playing, and figuring out what the advantageous move is on an 8x8 grid with discrete rules that can be perfectly calculated with plenty of time. Let's say you're playing long chess. You're not in time trouble. Pretty difficult. In fact, we all think of it as difficult. That's one of the reasons why people admire the great grandmaster chess players, is that they're able to figure that out, except they're really not. Even the grandmasters, we now know, make tons of mistakes because we can now put them against computers that will calculate perfectly. Even in a situation in which there is a rational advantage that could be calculated, and one that is far more limited than the absolute infinite complexity of life, you'd have to spend your whole life trying to figure out in that little game what the advantage is, and you'll still get it wrong. How hubristic of us then to think, knowing that, believing that we could go into life, that life is somehow less complex than a game, and that we could know what our advantage is? No. You don't believe that. You don't think that. And I don't think that either. Which is why that question that it's like, okay, well, sure, there are these big questions about what's good and what's bad, blah, 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 blah. But we kind of know what we're going to do, right? So there is just a question of how to get there. I really don't believe that. I think it's very difficult to figure out how to get where you want, even if you think you know what you want. So all of these things are so difficult. Why would we assume that we would know how to get there? But anyway, welcome to the Rhetoric Prof stream. We are talking about chess and the play The Crucible by Arthur Miller. I'm talking about all sorts of weird stuff. But the stream format for tonight is Argument Doctor. And in this format, the way that we usually do it, this is only the second time, so there's not really a way we usually do it, is that you bring an argument, and I'll try to help you make it better. And I can do this either by arguing against you or by trying to talk with you about it. You explain to me a little bit of what you're looking for. Hey, Switch Stop. Welcome. Yo. Yo, groiper. Is that considered a groiper? Or is it just a frog with a 10? Or is it a friend? Yeah, I just realized that I can look at the chat on my phone, which makes it a lot easier than trying to read it off the tiny screen. So now I'm cooking with gas. Cooking with gas. Close and cigar. As in not close and no cigar. I got the cigar this time. I'm not smoking a cigar. Okay. Yeah. So if you have any arguments, bring them forward. Otherwise, I'm just going to talk. This is also a back to school edition, which only means that it's getting close to the school year. I could not tell you. You couldn't tell me what? You don't know much about Twitch. Neither do I, obviously. So you don't need to do anything special. Just what's something that if you're thinking, you're going back into your experience, like, what's an argument that I try to make? That might not be the way it's going to come to you, because a lot of times when we're having arguments that come up a lot in our life, we don't think about them as arguments. We think about them as situations or as issues or problems. And so we can talk about those too. I'm going to think about them I'm going to translate that into terms of argument, but, if it was the frog thing or not. I got you. Sorry, I'd already forgotten that I'd asked that question to you about the groiper. It's pretty cute. We're going to just call it a frog, I think. I caught a salamander last time when the leaves were changing. Went to New Hampshire with a couple friends, walked up a mountain. There's a little lake, and I caught a salamander for the first time. I've never been able to catch something in my hands from a lake before, so I finally did it. Feeling good about that. If you have, like myself, never had luck, don't give up. You'll still catch that salamander one day. Just has to be the right day. So we're talking a little bit about human motivation, why people are motivated to maybe do things that injure themselves or harm themselves. Why? We all do this, don't we, though? I mean, not just in the kind of obvious way of like, I shouldn't have the candy bar because tomorrow I'll have a tummy ache and those extra pounds or whatever. But in a way in which, like, there's really no good reason. And we kind of still find ourselves attracted like a moth to the light. Like, oh no, here I go. Why do we do that? So that's one of the things that I'm thinking about. And also thinking about the school year, because I'm always thinking about teaching. I teach public speaking primarily, and variations on that theme. I teach it as a rhetorician. Some people teach public speaking as like Toastmasters. Like, here's how you do it. Here's how you make yourself sound polished, which is fine. But the way that I think about public speaking is it's a big part of life. It's not just a question about giving a presentation once every 4 years. Pretty much all of the times when we're communicating with other people, we mostly think about the public side, but not only the public side, even in the intimate sphere, when we're talking with people that are really close to us, people we have close relationships with. Questions about how do I communicate what I'm thinking and feeling? How do I make the best version of my argument? What's appealing to people? All of these things are relevant, and there are lots of ways of thinking about them. So it's quite exciting and interesting. So that's how I like to think about it, and that's really what I'm bringing to the Rhetoric Prof stream. Not trying to put you in class. I don't want to be in class. I don't want to get grades. I just want to have an interesting discussion and think about things with you. So if you have arguments, problems, situations in your life, this is Delilah. Welcome to Delilah. You probably don't know the reference to Delilah. But anyway, like, imagine it like a radio call-in show. This is a radio call-in show, except it's a type-in show. Type in an argument or a problem or situation that you've been having in your life, and we will try to help you with it. And we have lots of different ways of doing that. You get to pick. I'll help direct you. I'll ask you some questions. You bring the matter, and I'll bring the form. That's the way it goes. Or I'll just talk until somebody does that. I used to love listening to radio late at night. Late night radio gets weird, especially at the low ends of the dial, or the high end sometimes. You ever noticed how especially on the FM, does anybody even listen to AM radio anymore? Probably most of you never have ever listened to AM radio. Maybe there's a sports channel on AM radio. You're like, oh, okay, well, my team only plays on this station. Maybe that's why. But AM radio used to be the standard. Then FM came out. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people don't listen to radio very much anyway. Why would you? You can just turn on the internet, turn on Spotify. You can play whatever you want. That's mostly how I am. I listen to the radio now mostly when I'm driving in the car, and I didn't download a playlist or something to listen to. But I agree. I think there's some good AM radio. What's the kind of AM radio that you listen to mostly? I feel like pretty much exclusively what I hear on AM radio, if I ever listen to it, is a baseball game that I'm trying to find somewhere, or sometimes when I'm driving a really long distance, I like to tune into the AM radio to get the preachers. I find what they do pretty interesting. There's a sports network that talks about the 49ers and other Bay Area sports. Yeah. And there's not, some people like the vinyl record, like, ooh, the crackle of the vinyl, it gives it a special feeling. But I feel like the lie of that's very clear, because if you're going to have the same broadcast in AM or FM, probably you're going to listen to the FM, because as the Steely Dan song goes, no static at all. The song is called FM, if you're curious. So, yeah, you don't need that static, but there is, sometimes you can only get it that way. But there is a little bit, I have a little bit of nostalgia for like trying to make something out of the crackle in the radio, and this really does age me a little bit, in the kind of static on the television of a channel you don't subscribe to. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced that, where you're kind of, I remember trying to watch James and the Giant Peach through static. Very old-timey experiences now. I missed the explanation of FM versus AM, but is it basically 5? Yeah, it's different wavelengths. I mean, I don't know everything about it. I'm not going to pretend that I know everything about it. One of the things that's interesting, though, is the electromagnetic spectrum, which is light. Part of it's light. There's government regulations about this. And so there have to be, that's part of why telecommunications legislation gets introduced, is to turn into not property in the sense of ownership, but certain kinds of rights, bundles of rights that get associated with these things, which channels can be on what. That's why you can have something like pirate radio, which is in international waters and violates all those rules. So those kinds of things are weird to think about. The electromagnetic spectrum doesn't seem like a legal object, but it really is, or it has become one. Yeah, I have always wanted to build a radio. I'm like, every summer, I'm going to build a radio kit. So I'll learn more about how it really works in terms of the transistors and everything, but I never have done it. So I don't know what that says about me. It says that I'm kind of lazy, I guess. But I keep meaning to do it and don't do it. So maybe I'll just not do it during summer. I'll just do it whenever I remember it next time. Just get it. Have the kit ready to go. But yeah, in trying to like kind of get something through static, or get something through crackle on the radio, I think that's actually kind of a good metaphor for a lot of how I think about what rhetoric does, which is it's really more an art of listening than speaking. We're trying to be like in that crackle of all those different, it's that moment when it's crackly and there's like two stations coming together. There's like a brimstone fire preacher and like a mariachi band kind of coming together, mixing up on a stream. You're trying to figure out what's going on. You're trying to listen to part of that and figure out, what does that mean? Who is that for? How did that get on the radio? Same thing in our daily lives of trying to listen to a situation and be like, what's really happening here? And there's a lot of stuff that we have to say, oh, that's just the noise. We make decisions about that. How do we do that? What kinds of principles do we use? What kind of ideas might direct our way of listening in that more abstract way? And I find the tradition of rhetoric to be very useful for that, for attuning yourself to what you want to get out of the crackle, what you want to listen to in that particular radio fuzz. But yeah. Oh man. Spending too much time on Twitter. That's what I've realized recently. Too much time on Twitter. I don't post anything. I just look at stuff, which makes it even worse. It's just kind of an endless scroll. I know you can do this on anything. TikTok, Instagram. You can do this with circular ads. You can do this with anything. Just the scroll. Why do we like scrolling so much? I think one of the things that's very pleasurable about it is that it is an literally infinite activity. Infinite in the old sense of not bounded, without definition, without structure. And there's something very pleasurable about being in an activity that doesn't have any particular end, but also doesn't make you endure any particular content any longer than you want. So it's like the perfect kind of combination of human will, of being like, la donne mobile. I can just choose to look at anything that I want. Just kind of scan on a Wikipedia hole, whatever it is. But also, there's no particular place to go. I don't know why I'm singing all of these old rock tunes tonight, but yeah, that feeling is very pleasurable. And it's like the opposite of everything that the university does. The university doesn't want to compete on those grounds. So it's like, here's this discrete period of time. Everything is in terms, end, limit. That's where things happen. That's where knowledge is. The thing with scrolling is it's very hard to stop, since you never know if the next tweet is going to be the great one. Ooh, yeah. Isn't that part of the addiction too? When am I going to hit the jackpot this time? If I stop scrolling now, I might miss. Yeah, the mentality. That's interesting. So the kind of FOMO theory. This is an argument. Think about it as an argument. It's a hypothesis about why scrolling is pleasurable. The FOMO theory. Maybe it's the next one that's good. And there's no real good way of knowing except looking. It's a kind of, we might call it a trap of empiricism. Empiricism gone bad. If you think about empiricism we like to think about empiricism as the basis of science. I think it's a little more complicated than that. But empiricism, that desire to, let me just see. Let me actually just experience it, and then I can decide. Empira means experience in Greek. So the empirical, the experienced. Well, what about these kinds of situations in which you have an experience organized for you algorithmically? So probably it is pretty predictable, but you don't know the algorithm. So there might be surprise built into it. What if the next one's the surprise? What if the next one's the thing that I'm really looking for, and you don't know? I think that's a really good hypothesis. It makes me think of another movie called Stalker by Andrei Tarkovsky, who is kind of known as being this avant-garde director during the Soviet period. He was a Soviet director, and he had these really long shots. He's famous for just kind of putting the camera and letting the camera linger for really long periods of time on a certain shot, like the shot of a candle, just like flickering in the wind. I wonder if this would have the same effect today, because people are like, yeah, long shots. I just go on Twitch and I just look into the camera. So I don't know. Maybe the Tarkovsky thing doesn't quite work anymore. But in the movie Stalker, it's a very weird movie, and there's all these weird things. But they get out to the zona. And what's the zone? You don't really know. They never really explain it. But you can't just kind of directly walk into the center of it, which is where they're trying to go for whatever reason. You need a stalker, someone to lead you there. You have to take all these twists and turns. Well, eventually, spoilers, when they get to the center, what they're really looking for is a room that's filled with their true desire. But what's horrifying is that the moment you open the door, you know what your real desire is. Do you want to know what you really desire? Turns out in the movie, maybe they didn't want to know what they really desired. And I think that's one of the things that also might be part of what's working in the deep background of lots of human motivations, but even the scrolling, which is it kind of keeps me on the level of an image of my desire that isn't really in touch with the profound truth. Favorite film, short film. Ooh, that's pretty tough. I would say the most beautiful film, I don't know that it's my favorite film, the most beautiful film is The Color of Pomegranates. Incredibly beautiful film. Very strange. Also very strange if you... I've seen it a few times, so I talked to somebody who introduced to me it, and she was from a former Soviet state that was close to where this guy lived, and so she explained a few things to me that I don't think I would understand otherwise, but that's a very beautiful film. It's available for free on YouTube. You can probably get a higher quality version of it elsewhere. Favorite short film? Again, it's like I love Soviet cinema or something. It's not really true. It's unusual. But the best short animated film is, I think, The Hedgehog in the Fog. Also a very beautiful film. Also available on YouTube. The Hedgehog in the Fog. A very beautiful animated film. But yeah, favorites are hard. They change a lot. Like, I just watched Chinatown. I'm like, Chinatown's my favorite film, but probably not. Yeah, favorite animated film? Yeah, it might be The Hedgehog in the Fog. Like a longer one? I don't know. I have a lot. A lot of ones that I really like. Creative animation, like animation, doing stuff. I have a friend who writes about animation, so based on her, we talk a lot about it, and she turns me on to like think about what's really happening in terms of the process of animation. So through that, I've had a different appreciation of it, I think. Favorite animated film? So many good ones. What's your favorite animated film? Maybe I can cheat a little bit here and stall it. Yeah, Ghibli film. I know it's kind of corny, but I really like Howl's Moving Castle. I think that might be my favorite one. I probably would change though. There are things that are kind of melodramatic about it, and there's part of the style, the Ghibli style, that I don't love. But that's okay. I've also been looking at a lot of Hokusai recently, who is one of the first. I don't have Japanese, so ukiyo-e artists, and starting to see some of the relationships between like manga style art and anime art. And that tradition has been interesting too. So my favorite animated film is a short film by the name of Memorable. Okay, cool. I'll check that out. I don't know that one. Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind is my favorite. That's a really good one too. I have seen that one. That's a really good one too. I don't remember it that well. It's been a while, so but maybe I'll go back to that one because I know I will watch another one soon. But this is another interesting kind of argument that comes up a lot, where people say, okay, well, it's just your opinion. What's the best Ghibli film? And sure, I mean, we don't need to go to war over what the best one is. Why would we do that? It's just for fun. We're kind of showing things. But even to make those kinds of arguments interesting, you want to give your reasons. Well, why is that the best one? So I'll do my best. I'll give a couple reasons. I'm kind of rusty on the material, so I can't compare it very well. But I would say that making those arguments kind of is persuasive, right? You want to show why you like it, not because you need the other person to believe it, because you want to explain what it means that you believe that or that you feel that way about it. I would say that one of the things that I really like in Howl's Moving Castle is what appeared to me like very corny the first time, this whole thing about the heart. There's like the hearts that he has to like kind of take out and kind of put in. And the kind of weakness that you get every time you use a power, that you're kind of like, that there's this kind of like direct cost every time that Howl kind of turns into this weird oil bird thing that he turns into. He like becomes weaker. But I actually think that that's a brilliant part of the allegory. I think the film is really an allegory, and it's a very brilliant allegory for something about love that doesn't often appear in a lot of, doesn't appear in that light, where love often gets represented as a kind of single sacrifice, as a sacrifice that happens where you kind of give up something for the beloved, and maybe that's even tragically prevents your love, and these kinds of stories. But I think one of the things that I like that's different is that really often love is kind of quotidian, mundane, and might be quite taxing. And one of the things that you find through love, through doing it daily, is the measure of your strength, because it is taxing to love. It's not just a choice made once, perhaps with a great sacrifice, perhaps not, you just got lucky, fate smiled kindly upon you. So that's one of the reasons that I really like that movie, because I think it explores the theme of love under that condition, which is pretty unusual and unique, and I think it's really great. So that's my best argument for why Howl's Moving Castle is a good and my favorite Ghibli film. But yeah, what's Memorable about? What is it? What's its theme or plot? I don't know that one. It looks like it's French because it has the accent aigu, so maybe that's why I've never heard of it. Yeah, favorite film. I love these kinds of questions of favorites, though. I remember as a kid being like, I had first favorite color, second, third. I had so many hierarchies of value. And I think this is another thing we were talking earlier about hierarchies of value that people have and live with. And what can be dangerous about that, but what can be great about that. And I think one of the things that kids do when they just kind of compare their favorites, and they have so many, is the kind of joy and play that can come from kind of playing with your values. That might seem a little glib, but there's like a special thing that's happening in the chat. I don't know what that is. Huh. How does that work? So some Twitch feature just happened that I'm not aware of what it is, so I'm sorry if I didn't see your message. I don't know where it went. Can't say too much because it's short and best experience, but basically it's the beautiful story of an older couple coming to terms with being very towards the end of life. That's right up my alley, so I will probably check that out. That sounds great. Yeah, I like those kinds of, I like dramas that, where people are just dealing with their circumstances. There's not like a great event. People are just kind of in a situation and they have to deal with it in some way. I think those are often, they can be very boring if they're not well done, well acted, well written, well directed. They have to be all of those things. But when they are, it really can't be better than that. So I will check that out. I'm sorry. I think curious questions. You might have said something. I don't know where it went. Because I really don't understand how Twitch works, apparently. There's a lot more features than I realized. Oh yeah, stop motion is great. Yeah, my little cousin has done some stop motion of her own, and I was just so impressed by just the amount of labor and work that goes into making stop motion animation is very impressive, but something that I could not do. I do not have the patience for that. Subotic. Is that a word? I probably should know that word if it is. I don't know what it means. Subotic Mars. I thought it was suboptic at first when I first read it, like below the. I don't know what that means either, but. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm just saying all the old lines. What do you expect? I'm an old hack. Huh? Subatomic. That's also good. These are all good. I mean, that's the true genius, to choose a handle that even when people misread it, it's something cool. I think that's great. Those are both kind of interesting. Yeah, the subatomic. It's kind of weird that we have an idea of a subatomic. It kind of shows you, like, one of the things that we tend to think about science is it's like very conceptual, but the concept that's contained in the word of atom, literally meaning non-divisible in the Greek. Well, how can you split the non-divisible? Well, it just turns out you can. The thing that we were calling that, it's not. It is divisible. You had to figure out how it was, and you had to have a particular kind of material to do it, fissile material. So, is it really conceptual, or is it about the development of a concept to an expansion where it maybe changes and transforms on you? I like that kind of attitude towards science, where it's about this kind of metamorphosis, where concept changes into something totally different at some point in its historical development. And it's totally unpredictable. That's the most beautiful thing. Not the moment of kind of like seeing the truth of the experiment confirmed perfectly with the formula, but the moment of like strange metamorphosis of a concept into something else that you never thought it would be. And I think you find that outside of science as well. I think you find it in lots of history. It's one of the reasons why history can be really interesting to read, where you look at the past and you're like, oh, that's kind of like what we have, but different. And what is that difference? And you learn something about yourself and thinking about that difference. Either way, sorry. I still don't know what your name means, though. Yeah. Favorites are great. I like having favorites. I also like changing them up. So I was favorite color red for a lot of my childhood, and then I was like, I'm blue. Just going to become favorite color blue. I changed my mood about color. There's a great, if you're really into, you don't either. If you really like this kind of thinking about color abstractly, it's a book, it's also a musical album. I don't know how to explain it. It's a series of letters written by an art critic and a painter to each other called I Send You This Cadmium Red. They just send pure colors to each other in the mail, but send back little letters with their thoughts about the color. And then a contemporary composer, like put some guitar music behind it. Kind of a cool, chill, spoken word album if you're looking for one of those. Yeah, Blue Gang, yeah. Yeah, I'm really into blue now. And there's no going back now. Not to red, anyway. Also, I went whale watching and being out on the blue of Boston Harbor into the ocean. I loved that. And so, more confirmation for being blue gang. You get to have all that. It's not just blue, though, you know. That'd be a weird way to see water. Water's just blue. It's like, is everything just the color that... How do we get those associations? Okay, well, there's a history there. But just that association, you're not seeing much if you just see the association with the color. Apples are red. Are they? Even when they are they really just red? There's more to it. So we do that with a lot of things. We just kind of see it as the association. We learn it in school, and we just see the thing that we learn. We just see the concept. And again, that's neither interesting nor really scientific. It's like push the concept, push the perception to its most vivid edge. What do you think and what do you see at that point? When you're a little bit more alive, you might say, than otherwise. That might be harsh, but I don't see it that way. It's just encouragement to see a little bit more than what you're seeing. So take a look at the colors around you and try to name them. Try to see how many you can name, how many differences you can see. It's going to wake you up a little bit to how much is going on when you perceive things. So much. Yeah, I should probably get a charger for my phone because it's not going to last forever, but we'll just go with it. Push it to the edge, as I just said. I like that both of you knew this film. That's pretty cool. I'll have to check it out. Radio, film, television. I guess since we're going through all of them. Favorite television series, or maybe what's the best television series might be the better question. What's the best one, and then what your favorite is? Because no one has. You don't think that your favorite's the best, right? That's not what favorites are. Be like, oh no, you're my favorite. You're my pet. This is something that's like delightful. But of course, it's not the best. It's hard to take delight in what's the best. I mean, that's kind of boring. It was nominated for the short film animated Oscar a few years back. But that's one of the things I used to love. There was a theater in Pittsburgh where I was living for a time where they would play all the Oscar shorts. There was an independent theater, and they would play all of them, the animated ones, the documentary films. They would have like an evening for each, which is great. You just buy a ticket and you go in and watch, and there'd be conversations afterwards and stuff. I love that. But haven't done that in a few years, so I'll look for that here in the future. Chernobyl, I haven't seen that one either. Yeah, I'm a little suspicious of that one because I know someone who studies Chernobyl and is from Belarus. So her opinion holds a lot of weight, and she was not too positive about it. But nevertheless, I think I will check it out. Objectively, I think Breaking Bad is probably the best, most well-rounded TV show of all time. That's a common opinion, I think. A lot of people have that opinion. I've seen I think I did see actually. I saw all of them, followed by the Twilight Zone. Oh, the original Twilight Zone? I assume you're talking about the original Twilight Zone. There's like 2 other versions of it in the future, I think. But yeah, the original Twilight Zone, so good. So good. I mean, some of it's very corny, but even that's part of what's good about it. Yeah, good answers. Both of those are good answers. Something about Breaking Bad just is like, it kind of goes a little too far for me, I think. Who is America? Oh, I don't know that one. Who is America is pretty good. Huh. I'll have to check that out. I've never even heard of that. That's just, well, I say that a lot, though. There's a lot I haven't heard of. But oh, Sacha Baron Cohen. Okay, yeah. I saw Borat 2. I did watch that. I thought it was there were interesting moments. There were some things that I was like, ooh. I guess that's how you're supposed to feel. But I usually like what he does a lot. I think he's pretty funny. He's a pretty funny guy. I like his Ali G stuff a lot, especially where he was pretending to be, I don't even know, like a guy from East Stratford or whatever he was trying to be. A kind of London, like, hip guy going to this chicken sandwich shop, but really kind of corny and offensive. And yeah, it was great. Good characters. Yeah, both good options. I would say if you're really into the like really well produced, high quality shows, if that's your thing, kind of like Breaking Bad, you should check out Deadwood. Deadwood is a really good one. Maybe not quite as popular, but certainly not because it's any less quality. It's a really good show. Really, really good show. It's a Western, but if you don't like Westerns, don't let that deter you, because it's not a typical Western. It's like a story of people's lives in the rawest sense, and it's kind of a story about like how people live without law, and also how law kind of develops in a community. It's very interesting. Lots of angles to it. So check that one out. Deadwood. This is sponsored by Deadwood. No, it's not, obviously. That show is over. It's canceled. They made a movie, but now it's really over. They're not going to make another movie. Yeah. Back to school. Here we go. One thing that I am wondering about is, we'll check it out. Yeah, you should definitely check it out. I'm pretty sure it's HBO. So if you are interested in a legal way of accessing the show, go through the HBO channel, I would say. It's going to be strange. One of the funny things about the whole mask thing, it always feels a little different to me because I do public speaking, and I am totally fine speaking with a mask on, but I would imagine if I were in the position of like taking my very first public speaking class and I got to do it with a mask on my face, I wonder how that feels. That must feel pretty weird. That must make some people pretty uncomfortable, and also maybe it helps a little bit because like people can't quite see your expression as much. I don't know. Could go either way, like most things. But I'm trying to think about ways to make the public speaking class as kind of inviting and pleasurable, despite the fact that it will be under that condition. So physically, what do you mean by physically? Physically, for me, I'm totally fine with it. Like it doesn't faze me too much, but yeah, I don't really find it physically uncomfortable. Some people do, apparently. Some people do. I do have, because I have glasses. You've probably heard this. It can fog up your glasses under some circumstances, so that can be disorienting, or it can cause you to have to adjust little things here and there. But I think it's more uncomfortable. The way I'm imagining is it's uncomfortable because public speaking is uncomfortable for people already. People come into a public speaking class, they tend to be a little nervous and uncomfortable. I try to play it down because everybody's in the same boat. But anyway, people are. I wonder whether having a mask on how that's going to affect people who have that particular kind of anxiety about public speaking. So something that you wouldn't have in a lot of other classes, because you just kind of go into class, you open your book, you listen, you take notes. You don't have to do too much. I mean, I don't mean to put it down. You're listening, you're paying attention, taking good notes, I guess. But at least the way that a lot of I hear the classes represented is they're pretty they're kind of lecture heavy. Might not be everybody's experience, but this class is certainly not. So it just adds another element to it. Also, facial expression is part of the thing. So you have to kind of work a little bit more with your eyebrows. I guess. I don't know. We're all kind of figuring it out still. Still figuring it out. We should have figured a little more of it out, is my opinion. But you're in public speaking. Yeah, well, you'll do fine. You see, this is the thing. You always do fine. You always do fine. So I'm not worried about that at all. You'll do fine. It's more your feeling about it, first of all, because like even though I know, you can throw somebody into a pool and they'll learn how to swim. I don't think that that's what you should do, just because you know that they will learn that way. Like, you should make it pleasurable and enjoyable, but you'll be fine. Don't worry. It'll be fine. I don't think I generally get anxious for that type of thing, but we shall see. Yeah, if you don't get anxious, that's great. I don't get particularly anxious about it, but I think there's also some value in getting anxious about it for some people, which is that it kind of is like, the way I think about it is, it attunes you. It's like your antenna is working. You're like, there's lots of possibilities out there, and you're focused on all the things that could go wrong. But at least you're focused on the possibilities. That's better than some people who are just like, I have a thing to say. Why am I using my meat thermometer? I have a thing to say. I'm going to say it. And they just ignore the audience. That's not very good. So it's probably better to be nervous than to be like, ignore the audience. But the best thing is to not be nervous and speak to the audience. I get anxious, but I like talking when I feel confident about what I'm talking about and I know it well. Yeah, I think knowledge, we'll talk a little bit about this if you're in the class. We'll talk a little bit about knowledge and how that relates to how you feel about things. I think that knowledge is really important. You have to prepare for a speech. You have to kind of know what you're talking about. But the way that I think about that knowledge is a little different than like the way you would know something for a test. Be like, okay, what's the form of Byzantine architecture? And you have your flashcard and you kind of like memorize these discrete set of facts. It's a little more like the knowledge of like, do you know your neighborhood? You know your way around? It's a knowledge that's both kind of general and vague, but vague not because it's just like loosey-goosey, vague because I might be asking you directions from this spot or from that spot. And you'll have to kind of be able to quickly triangulate in lots of ways. In fact, it's kind of a more, how do I put this in a generous way? It's a more practical knowledge. It's based on kind of savoir-faire more than savoir. It's not just kind of pure knowledge. It's kind of knowledge of how to move practically about in a topic, because it's not just the topic as knowledge, it's the topic as concern or interest for an audience who you're talking to. You're always talking for a purpose, and that kind of changes the form of knowledge, which is an interesting thing in its own right. I speak to a bunch of people all the time, but in a recording video format where I can edit stuff out and whatnot, so I'm curious how much... Oh yeah, I'd be interested to see that if you ever want to share it. Because it's like, the video edit format with the jump cuts and all that kind of stuff is like a weird, cool medium between speech and writing. It has features of both. Like the edit, the montage. This, I think, is a lot more like writing, where you can kind of draft and craft in a way that you can't. In the streaming is a little bit more just like talking, because, there's no editing happening. And that spontaneity can be like, that is a little bit different. But I would say that there's relationships between speech and writing, there's lots of relationships between public speaking and the kind of, if you're a YouTuber or if you make Instagram or TikTok videos, I think there's a lot of similarity. And in fact, there are probably things that from those formats that would enrich the experience of public speaking and trying to translate them back into the spontaneous moment. Switchtop YouTube channel yours? Oh, cool. You have a YouTube channel. I'll have to check it out. Very cool, very cool, very cool. I also have a YouTube channel called Rhetoric Prof, where you can see my VODs and little lecture videos I make. And if you're in my class and something is confusing, or if you want to know more about an idea, you can just request a video and just be like, say more about this. And then I'll try to do a video that's a little bit more composed than these kinds of streams. And I'll make one. Oh, wow. This must be a big YouTube channel. Very cool. Yeah, I think that if you know a lot about YouTube, I kind of think about YouTube as the most public speaking. Where you're going to speak to more people than on YouTube. Of course, the algorithm has to bring you your public, so there's this weird kind of fight. You have to build it up, and you have to put in a lot of work, I'm sure you have, into your channel to make it good. I don't put a lot of work into my channel, unfortunately. Maybe one day I will, but if you have a public, they came to you as well as you came to them. There's a kind of meeting in the middle. If you know what that's about, you're going to have an easy time in the class, because that's what the class is about. Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah. College. Welcome to college. Back to school. Here we are. I think that one thing I would hope that the university would do, they won't do it, but universities in general, I think it would be very, like, in their own interest. We talked before about how finding your advantage can be quite difficult in life as well as in games, but especially in life. Nevertheless, I think it would be to the university's advantage to know a little bit more about the amazing kinds of creators that they have at their university and encourage them to produce content for the university and to like think about it as part of their academic career. I think it would be cool to have scholarships for content creators for universities. I have a feeling that one might be in the pipe. We might see that one in about 10 years, but why not? Why wait? I think that you should be able to get a scholarship for what you're creating because it's kind of publication. And what are the people that are teaching you? What's their qualification? Well, they've published stuff in their field. Well, you've published stuff in a field. Maybe the most difficult one, which is the public. So that's how I think about it anyway. Why is the public not a field? It's not a field of knowledge necessarily, not of a particular kind of knowledge. Or maybe it is a particular kind of knowledge, public knowledge. But also feeling and affiliation. Lots of things are going on in public beyond just knowledge. Yeah, that would be incredible. That would be cool, right? I hope so. Here's how I think that we get to that, which is that content creators like yourself and other people write arguments. Welcome to the Argument Doctor stream. Write arguments about why that would be good or how that you would envision that and try to get them published as op-eds and student papers or online in visible places and kind of have some pressure. The idea needs to circulate before anyone will act on it. We don't know what the conditions will be to kind of make people accept this idea or make people see what's valuable in this idea until we at least articulate it first. We have to do that first. There has to be some argument first. But I think it's very easy to make these arguments. There's lots of good ways, lots of good analogies, and lots of good principles to base, I think, that kind of scholarship on. So if you want that in the world for yourself, maybe more likely for others because it would take time, write it up. Get other people to underwrite it for you. Develop the argument and try to get it published. Just a thought. But that's one of the things that we can do in this kind of a class is think about what kinds of arguments do we want circulating in the public. The way I think about it is we have good publics, we have good arguments circulating. But we don't think about the arguments as just these one-on-one interactions. And every time you get on Twitter or on Facebook with your aunt or whatever, and you get in it, you're like, oh, wow, it all sucks. It's all a bunch of shit. It's all a fucking avalanche of mud and blood. And I don't want any part of it. Okay, I understand that feeling because I have it probably every day. But at the same time, a lot of bad arguments might be the medium, the agar, to grow the good stuff. Because when you make a good argument, it becomes rich and fertile, and you see lots of lines of possibilities because it can say why it's not the other things. And in developing an argument in an environment of lots of bad arguments, I mean, this is just a way of kind of being a little bit happier about being in a bad public. It's like, okay, there's lots of bad arguments. How could I make this public better? I could try to make an argument that is more sophisticated, more nuanced, more powerful, more evidenced, more related to human interest and being and concern than everything that's available. I'm going to do it. I'm going to give it a shot. Maybe it will circulate. Here's a video that was a video essay format that's more so scripted. Better than most of my off-the-cuff videos. If you want to check it out after the stream, I'd love to get some feedback. Oh, yeah, for sure. That's awesome. I love doing that kind of stuff. You can always find me in the Discord if you're in the Discord. You can just text me there. We can chat anytime there. You can also come and visit me on campus, and we can talk about it there too. But I usually use Discord for like meeting and stuff. But yeah, I'll definitely check it out. This is exciting. I have homework. Talk about back to school edition. That's great. Yeah, I think the off-the-cuff kind of thing, which is really all that I do on these channels. Oh, I do a little bit of, I compose some for like instructional videos. But the off-the-cuff, it is a very different style. It's a very different style, and they go long. One of the things that happens, they go long. So I feel like they're quite ephemeral. Now, some people will go back and watch these long things and treat them like podcasts or whatever, but I think it's just a different genre, you know? How do you deal with C-lining and JAQing? What is that? I don't know what those mean. C-lining? C-lioning. I don't know what that means. JAQ. I can try to guess what JAQing. Just asking questions. C-lioning. Trolling or harassment that consists of pursuing people with persistent requests for evidence. While maintaining a pretense of civility. This is a great question. I'm glad this has a name. Because, yeah, this comes up a lot. Just asking questions. Oh, I was right. I guessed correctly. Okay, the term originated with a 2014 strip of the webcomic Wondermark. Okay, so I don't feel too bad for not having heard it, because that is pretty niche. But, yeah, I like the idea of it. I'll look more into the webcomic later. Wow, you guys are giving me so much stuff to... These are great. Yeah. Well, there's a short answer, which is insufficient, and there's a long answer, which is welcome to the class. And we can kind of work on this for a long time. When people kind of insist on evidence, there's lots of questions to ask in response. We were like, where's your evidence? What kind of evidence people mean is really important. So one thing that I see a lot is when people are doing this kind of thing, they're like, where's your evidence? What they really want is like, where's your data? Where are your numbers? Where are your facts? Where's your empirical evidence? Because they want to assert and assume that empirical evidence is the only form of evidence. Not only is empirical evidence not the only form of evidence, empirical evidence is often an erroneous form of evidence, or certain kinds of empirical evidence for the kinds of claims that people are making. So we can break down, roughly speaking, in the 4 kinds of disagreements we might have. One would be a disagreement about the facts. Did this thing happen? Did it not? And there are variations of this. We're going to keep this really simple. We're just going to try to keep it to 4, but because there are lots of ways that this is not true, but okay, keep it simple. So we can have a disagreement about the facts. Then, in those kinds of arguments, be like, did this person, assault this other person? If we have physical evidence, that's empirical evidence. That's great because we're trying to ascertain what happened. Then there might be a definitional argument. So this might be something like people get into a fight. And someone's like, you assaulted me. And the other guy's like, no, I defended myself. Things are now a little more complicated. We're not arguing at least just about. There might still be some details we don't agree about. But we might both agree that we punched each other. We just don't agree about how to describe that. And what kinds of things would inform or justify those claims to you assaulted me versus I was defending myself. Some of it might be empirical. We might look at the tape and try to make judgments about, who began it. Because we have this intuition that if someone begins something, then they're more responsible for it. So those kinds of intuitions might be supported by empirical evidence. But some of it might be supported by things like motivational evidence, which is really not very empirical. It's like, did you have a reason to hit him? If not, then maybe you were just defending yourself, because why else would you do it? So that would be one of those places where you could be like, well, what kind of argument are we having? Is this an argument about empirical facts, or is this an argument about describing a reality, defining it in a certain way? That would be one. Another one might be like, no, I agree that I assaulted you, but you deserved it, you giant dirk. I don't know where that came from, dirk. That was like a compromise of 4 different curses. But it came out quite wholesome. Dirk, you're a big jerk. And you deserved it. Okay, that's not a great argument, put in that way. But we might have arguments that are about different values. You might say something's good, and I say, no, that's not good. That's actually bad. You'd be like, no, I think it's great. Patriotism is a value of mine. Someone else is like, I don't think it's a good value. I think we should have international feeling, or whatever. So those kinds of things are not going to be solved by facts or evidence that's empirical. it still there might be parts of that argument that rely upon empirical evidence, but that's not going to be the nature of the claim. It's going to be supported only by that. And finally, the manner of argument. That's a huge area. There's lots of things that go into that, but that's like how we're arguing. So because there are different kinds of disagreements, when people say, well, where's your evidence? One thing that you might do is kind of be like, think about what kind of disagreement are we having? Is that an attempt to get me to support a claim that I'm making? Or is that an attempt to kind of stonewall me by misconstruing the kind of disagreement or the kind of argument that we're having? So that's how I would answer it. There's more to that, but I think that's what if they devalue the credibility of the institution in charge of the empirical data? Well, I think that's potentially valid. It depends on the context that we're talking about. But I would say you should always be prepared to defend the institutions if you're relying on the authority of an institution, you should be prepared to defend that institution. But sometimes I think what people do is they kind of go for this all or nothing thing. Like, oh, it's the National Institute of Health. It has to be true. I probably don't think I have any source, any institution personally, that I would accept 100% claims of what they say. I don't feel that way about really anything. Some people do. Some people have very strong feelings about whether they're religious or scientific or political beliefs that they have, where they say there's some source of authority that I always accept. But when you have someone, if that's your position, that's an interesting question. We could talk about how to deal with that. I do have some ideas about that. But in the most circumstances, we're like, no, I think this is just pretty good. This is pretty credible. I think it's a good exercise to say, well, this is why I think it's credible, or this is why I think it's good if we as a community or we as a social group orient ourselves towards trust of these people. Well, why? Because what's the alternative? So sometimes it might be a comparative argument. You say, okay, here's why I trust them. It's not perfect. Where you're getting your opinions from, why do you trust them? And then we have to try to have a kind of meeting there. That might not seem to be like the strongest rational point of view. You might say, no, their things are bullshit. They're eating ivermectin for breakfast. Well, some people think that the ivermectin thing comes from a scientific study published by the National Institute of Health. That is factually incorrect. That's not really how it works. But even if it were a study published in a reputable journal, as was, for instance, published in Science before it was retracted, the infamous essay or report, experimental report about the relationship between vaccines and autism. Well, this guy has made a career on this, and lots of people in the anti-vaccination community have relied upon this and have used this great source, Science, the magazine Science, or it was Nature, I think it was Nature actually, which an even better journal, Nature, the best journal out there. And then it retracted it. The retraction, I would say, is important to that. But we should be able to kind of defend our sources of trust, but also encourage them to say, well, who do you trust? Who are you trusting here? Why don't you share that with me? And when we do that, what we learn is not just like things about the evidence, but things about those people's motivations and orientations, which will be useful in kind of connecting with them better and seeing where they're coming from. Because if somebody is like distrustful of science, maybe because they had a personal experience that they associate with science that was really negative, or historical experience, you might be sympathetic to that. You just might not think that the consequence of that is that you should eat ivermectin. But you won't know that. If you just say, well, oh, that's ridiculous, they're going to hear it as insulting their feeling, the good reasons that they have. So it's better to figure out where people stand when you have those kinds of disagreements. Why do they have this distrust? Where's that coming from? I think this is a good opportunity to ask people questions and to get a sense of why they have so much distrust. That helps you better persuade them, because that's what we're focused on here. We're not just focused on being correct. We're focused on being argumentatively effective. And persuasion is not the only way to think about it, but it's an important way to think about it. So anyway, that's a long answer to that. And we could give other ways of talking about it. But I think asking them what they believe in, what kinds of institutions they value, where they get their information from, will be helpful in trying to establish contact. Now, sometimes it might still be too difficult to be like, I get all of my information from world hip hop or whatever I get all my information from the Yahoo News feed, and you're like, oh, it's just not as good as my news feed. Whatever, you might not value it, and it might make it difficult for you to have a connection with someone on that basis. I think it's still worth a shot. If you are interested in persuading someone, knowing what they affiliate with, what they value, what they trust, that's a great piece of information. It's really valuable, and it's an opening to get to that. Sea lining. Sea lioning. That's going to be a tough one to say, though. There's also a great Nina Simone song called Sea Line. Or Sea Line Man? Maybe. Anyway, it's a good song. Yeah, these are great questions. I used to teach a class called Argument, where we would like really go in depth on these kinds of questions. Public speaking we sometimes do, but not always, because there's a lot to talk about in public speaking that relates to performance and other kinds of things other than argument. So, oh my gosh, it's almost 12:30. I did start pretty late. Just asking questions. I like that one too. The JAQing. Just asking questions. The thing about the just asking questions strategy is it's really about responsibility and about risk. One of the people I like who writes about argument says, argument is a person risking activity. So you can see that someone's arguing kind of in a half-assed way when they're just like, no, I'm just asking a question. What they're trying to do is reduce their risk, where they stand. And I think with that, these are all really contextual. It depends on the context, and there's not one approach that works every time. In fact, probably most approaches really are specific to their context. But one potential thing to keep in mind is you might kind of speak to that. That might go into the kind of manner of argument to have. Be like, wait a minute. You're just asking questions like you don't have a position? I want to know where you stand. I want to know that you have some skin in the game here. I'll tell you where I stand, but where do you stand? Do you believe something or you don't believe anything? You're kind of neutral. And if so, why are we having this argument? Sometimes you can ask people to clarify what their position is on an issue, or also just like why we're having the argument. Why are we arguing this? And if they're really defensive, they're like, no, I just asked you, answer. It becomes very obvious that they're not willing to argue. They're not really there to argue. They're there to try to embarrass or make you look bad. And you can still engage with them if that's your choice to do it. But yeah, don't expect too much. If someone's not willing to put any kind of skin in the game, make any commitment, make any claim, they're just going to kind of be like the casual inquisitor. I wouldn't spend too much time with those kinds of people unless you want to try to move them to another position and be like, no. I value what you think and what you have to say, but like, let's really have it out. Let's, tell me what you think and I'll tell you what I think and we can see where we go. It is difficult if someone's like not going to take any position. Hard to have a serious conversation. Serious conversation. Maybe people don't want to have serious conversations sometimes. That's also okay. Be like, no, wait a minute, we're just joking. Okay. Sometimes that's okay, but it would be pretty disappointing if you like lived your whole life and you're like, yeah, I never had a serious conversation. Wasn't interested, just wanted to have a good old time. Like, I'm suspicious that you did. Hard to have a good time if you're never able to kind of risk something, put something out there, make a claim, make a commitment, defend something, or accuse something. Though I just watched The Crucible, so maybe don't accuse things, because yikes, that can go really bad. Sea Lion, it even has a Wikipedia page. So in the strip, a character expresses a dislike of sea lions, and a sea lion intrudes to repeatedly ask her to explain her statements. That's pretty funny. And attempting, in an exaggeratedly civil manner, to interrogate her views, following the characters into the privacy of their own home. Wow, that's a great strip. I'll have to look that up. The term gained popularity as a way to describe online trolling. Yeah. I think one of the other things about trolling, I mean, it's difficult to talk too much about these kinds of strategies without thinking about emotion and motivation and the social, political situation that you find yourself in. And everyone knows this much at this point. I think everyone's experienced enough trolling. The last time I did this stream, I had a troll kind of come in and just post terrible things. Things that enough that like was actually disturbing to me that other people saw them. I was like, that's embarrassing that other people saw all of these terrible things that this person posted. So he was effective as a troll. Yes, I assumed it was a male. There were some reasons why, but yeah, it was gross. I think one of the things that motivates trolls is that they want to cause something. And that might seem like a weird desire, or it might seem like too abstract as a way to describe a desire. No, don't we want something specific? But I don't know. Have you ever hung out in front of the fridge and be like, I just want something. We ain't got nothing. And you're looking at tons of stuff. It's just like, nothing's quite there. So we've all had an experience of that kind of amorphous, underdetermined desire. It's a quotidian experience. But imagine if that desire is not the desire that you have as part of appetite for food, but the desire that you have as part of anger. And Aristotle, when he talks about anger, talks about it as a kind of desire, as a desire for revenge. So imagine that you're kind of like in front of the revenge refrigerator. This is a terrible metaphor. Best served cold. Saved it. You're in front of the revenge refrigerator. You're just like, I need some revenge, but I don't know, anything. Just to affect somebody, to have a rise in somebody, won't fully satisfy you, but it's like that hanging out in front of the fridge feeling. The anonymity and lack of consequences of the internet are ruthless. Yeah, and of course, yeah. If people had one thing that would balance that kind of aimless, casual anger is if you were afraid of the consequences. But since there really aren't very many, sometimes there might even be good ones for some people. It happens a lot more on the internet, but it's not just on the internet. Let's not become too fooled by the conditions of internet anonymity to think that the internet is where this stuff happens. It's just one of the places where it becomes clearest and happens the oftenest in public because of the anonymity. But this happens in every area of life. This kind of stuff. Anal aggressiveness, Freud might have called it. People who are... Why is it anal, you might say? Well, Freud's theory, this is pretty gross. If you have a queasy stomach, you might want to click out now. But Freud, you might not like Freud. I kind of do. You don't have to agree with everything he said, but I think he was a pretty insightful person. And a lot of us are borrowing his insights without citing them. So people who are like, Freud is debunked, constantly use terms and concepts that Freud literally coined. So maybe he's not as debunked as people think. Anyway, in his weird theory, one which is not the best theory of Freud's, but it's still interesting, about anal retentiveness. You might have even heard this term. People, you're so anal retentive. People who are a little bit overly parsimonious or a little bit too neat with things. They're bean counters. His idea was that this comes from a thing that happens with some children who hold back their poop. They constipate themselves. Is Freud the one that says that every man's secretly wants to save his mom? Yeah, see, he doesn't really say that, actually. He doesn't really say that. That's kind of a caricature of what he says. But that is the guy. Yeah, that is the guy. But that's not really what he says. Anyway, we don't have to go on into all that. It's a little more complicated than that, unfortunately, is almost always true. It's a little more complicated. But yeah, the child holds back their poop. And one variation of that is that that's what people love to do, that they become sadistic in that way. They're going to hold back on you. Whatever they feel that you want or need, they're not going to give it to you. So watch out for the sea lions, so to speak. Poor sea lions. I love seeing the whales, and I feel like they're all doing so much better than we are. You know, I'm not saying that their lives are easy, but just totally different. Just like living an animal life is not. You don't have as many concerns. Let's be real. You don't have as many concerns. Doesn't mean you don't have concerns. You just don't have as many. And you don't have to. Why would you want so many? We have so many. Yeah. Well, this was weird. But thank you so much for coming. This is really interesting, and I learned a lot of stuff. I have to go do some homework. So because I have to do some homework, I think I'm going to log off. Also, it's 12:30. And I go to bed late, but I'm getting older. So thanks for coming by. If you enjoy this kind of stuff, and if you ever want to talk about anything on stream, follow the channel and you'll get a notification. As you know, that's how Twitch works. So if you follow the channel, you'll get a notification when I come back on. I'm going to try to do it once a week. I probably won't, but I will try to do it once a week. And I have a few formats. This is one of them, the Argument Doctor one. And it's mostly just me talking anyway, but maybe if you have an idea for something else I could do, I'm also open to that. But otherwise, it was a pleasure to meet you, Switchtop, Subotic. Garen, you were in here, and Carious Questions. Again, I think that you sent me like a message, but I don't know where it went. If I find it later, I apologize. I didn't answer it on stream. Okay. See you next time. Take care.